The lights of New York City were blurring together into a neon haze as the night went on. It was one of those humid evenings where the air feels heavy on your skin, and the city doesn't seem to sleep. Inside a popular nightclub called Santa's Party House, the atmosphere was even thicker. The bass from the speakers was thumping so hard that you could feel it vibrating in your chest, matching the rhythm of hundreds of hearts beating at once. The place was packed. People were dancing, laughing, and shouting over the music to be heard. It was a sea of moving bodies, colorful drinks, and flashing strobe lights. In the middle of all this chaos, there was a man who didn't really want to be the center of attention. He was standing near the back of the room, leaning against a wall with a drink in his hand. It was Keanu Reeves. To most of the world, he was a massive movie star. The guy who played the legendary assassin John Wick, but tonight, he wasn't on a movie set and there were no cameras rolling. He was dressed in a simple dark leather jacket and a pair of jeans. He looked like any other guy trying to enjoy a rare night off. He wore a baseball cap low over his eyes, hoping to blend in. Keanu has always been known as a polite and humble person. He wasn't there to show off or to have people bowing to him. He just wanted to listen to some music, maybe have a couple of drinks, and relax like a normal human being. Every time someone walked past and recognized him, he would offer a shy smile or a quick nod, but he never tried to start a conversation. He just wanted to disappear into the background. He took a sip of his drink and watched the crowd, looking peaceful despite the loud noise surrounding him, however. While Keanu was trying to keep a low profile, there was another man in the club who had the complete opposite plan. This guy, a tall and muscular man with a thick neck and aggressive shoulders, was looking for attention. We can just call him the Fighter. He was an amateur boxer who spent his days in the gym hitting punching bags, and unfortunately, he had a habit of letting his ego get the best of him when he drank alcohol. Tonight, the Fighter had already had too much. He was stumbling slightly as he moved through the dance floor, bumping into people without saying "excuse me." His eyes were wide and his jaw was clenched tight. He was looking for a reason to get mad. He was looking for someone to push around because it made him feel big. He was that type of bully who feeds on the fear of others. When people saw him coming, they quickly stepped aside. Not because they respected him, but because they were scared he might start a fight. The Fighter made his way toward the bar area, pushing aside a smaller guy who was holding a beer. He didn't apologize. He just kept moving like he owned the place. He was radiating bad energy, and you could feel the mood of the people around him shift. They were trying to enjoy the music, but he was bringing a storm of negativity with him. As the Fighter got closer to the bar, he started scanning the room for his next target. He wanted someone who looked like they wouldn't fight back. Maybe someone smaller than him or someone who looked soft. He saw a group of guys in suits and glared at them, but they were in a tight circle. Then he looked toward the wall where the music was a bit quieter. That was where Keanu was standing. From a distance, Keanu didn't look very threatening. He wasn't puffed up like a bodybuilder. He was just standing there, calmly observing the room. To the Fighter, Keanu looked like an easy target. He saw a guy in a jacket who seemed quiet and reserved. The Fighter didn't notice the famous face, mostly because of the hat and the dim lighting. He just saw a guy who seemed to be minding his own business, and that made the Fighter angry. He hated the idea that someone could be so calm while he felt so agitated. The club was getting more crowded by the minute. The air was hot, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of sweat and alcohol. It was the perfect environment for something to go wrong. The Fighter pushed his way through the last group of dancers, knocking into a woman who spilled her drink. She shouted at him, but he ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on the man by the wall. Keanu, sensing the movement nearby, shifted his weight. He was aware of his surroundings, a habit he had picked up from years of training and making action movies. He could feel that someone was approaching with bad intentions, but he didn't react aggressively. He didn't turn to stare the guy down. He simply took a breath and prepared to move out of the way if he had to. He hoped the guy would just walk past, but the Fighter wasn't there to walk past. He was there to make a point. He was drunk on alcohol and his own ego. He stepped right into Keanu's personal space, filling the air with his aggressive energy. The music was loud, the lights were flashing, and the two men were now standing just a few feet apart. One was calm and respectful, wishing to be invisible. The other was a storm of rage, looking for an excuse to explode. The night was about to take a very sharp turn, and neither of them knew just how famous this moment was about to become. The contrast between the two men was impossible to ignore. As they stood in the shadows of the club, on one side you had a man who spent his life entertaining the world, known for being one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. On the other side you had a man who just wanted to break something. The fighter had no idea who he was messing with. He thought he was just picking on some random guy at a bar. He thought it would be an easy win. He had no idea that he had just walked right up to one of the most capable action stars on the planet. The collision was inevitable now. The stage was set, the crowd was watching, and in just a few moments the whole club would be in for a massive shock. The nightclub was getting ridiculously packed as the night went on. It was reaching that point where moving from one spot to another felt like trying to swim through a crowded ocean. The air conditioning was struggling to keep up, and the heat of so many bodies dancing together was making the room feel stuffy. Keanu decided that standing by the wall wasn't working anymore. Maybe he wanted to get some fresh air, or perhaps he was just trying to find a slightly quieter spot to finish his drink. He pushed himself off the wall and began to navigate through the thick crowd. Moving through a club like that is never easy. You have to slide past people who are lost in their own world, duck under raised arms, and mutter quiet, "Excuse me," that nobody can really hear. Keanu did this with a natural grace. He didn't shove anyone. If he bumped into someone, he tapped them on the shoulder and mouthed, "Sorry." He was just trying to be a decent person in a chaotic environment. He kept his head down, his baseball cap still low over his eyes, moving like a ghost through the party at the same time. The amateur fighter we talked about was moving in the opposite direction. He was in a terrible mood. The alcohol was making him sloppy, and his frustration was building up. He felt like he was the strongest man in the room, yet nobody was giving him the respect he thought he deserved. He was pushing through people much harder than necessary, practically knocking drinks out of hands. When people turned to glare at him, he just stared them down, daring them to say something. He was a ticking time bomb looking for a place to explode. The two of them were on a collision course, guided purely by bad luck. The club had a narrow walkway near the bar area where people were squeezing in to order drinks and others were trying to get back to the dance floor. It was a bottleneck. Keanu stepped into this tight space, trying to squeeze between a tall guy and a woman holding a purse. At that exact same moment, the fighter stumbled backward. Losing his balance for a split second, the impact was sudden and solid. The fighter crashed his back right into Keanu's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle bump. It was the kind of collision that makes you spill your drink if you aren't careful. Keanu managed to keep his footing, mostly because he has great balance, but the force of the hit made him stagger a step to the side. The drink in his hand splashed a little over the rim, landing on his hand and the floor. Now, a normal person in a loud club usually just turns around, maybe shrugs, and keeps walking. Accidents happen in crowded places, right? But this wasn't a normal situation. The fighter spun around instantly, his face twisted in anger. He was looking for a fight, and in his mind, someone had just dared to get in his way. He didn't care that he was the one who stumbled backward. In his drunk brain, he was the victim, Keanu. Seeing the big guy turn around, instinctively put a hand up. It wasn't a fighting hand. It was a calm, open palm gesture like he was trying to say, "Whoa, take it easy." He didn't raise his voice. He couldn't even be heard over the thumping bass music, so he relied on body language. He looked the big man in the eye, expecting the guy to just nod or move on, but when the fighter looked at Keanu, he didn't see a movie star. He didn't see a martial arts expert. The lighting was dim, flashing with different colors, and the hat hid Keanu's face. All the fighter saw was a guy of average height who looked a bit tired. He saw a guy who wasn't huge and bulging with muscles. To a bully like this, Keanu looked like the perfect target. He looked like someone who wouldn't fight back. This was the mistake that would change his night completely. The fighter stepped into Keanu's personal space, closing the gap between them until they were chest to chest. He was much bigger than Keanu, and he used his size to try and intimidate him. He started shouting, his words slurred but aggressive. He was saying things like, "Watch where you're going," and "You think you're tough?" The spittle from his mouth was flying as he yelled, but Keanu just stood there, stoic and calm. It was a strange moment to watch. The contrast between the two men was shocking. One guy was red-faced, veins popping out of his neck, screaming and waving his hands around like a crazy person. The other guy was perfectly still, holding his drink, looking at the screaming man with a look that was half confused and half pitying. Keanu wasn't scared. He just looked like he was dealing with a misbehaving child or a wild animal. The crowd around them started to notice the energy shift. People stopped dancing nearby. A small circle began to form. People love drama in a club, and they sensed that something was about to go down. Phones started coming out of pockets and pockets. The blue glow of camera screens started to light up the darkness around them. Nobody stepped in to help yet. They just watched, waiting to see what would happen. The fighter, seeing that he wasn't getting a scared reaction out of Keanu, got even angrier. He hated being ignored. He felt disrespected because this guy in the leather jacket wasn't cowering in fear. He pushed Keanu in the chest with two heavy hands. It was a hard shove, meant to knock someone backward. Keanu took a step back to absorb the energy, but didn't lose his balance. He didn't drop his drink. He didn't get angry. He simply stood his ground again. This calmness made the fighter lose what was left of his mind. He lunged forward, getting his face right up in Keanu's face, screaming insults now. He was challenging him to a fight right there in the middle of the floor. He had absolutely no idea that he was provoking a man who has spent years training in brutal martial arts. He thought he was pushing around a nobody. He thought he was the alpha wolf in the room, but he had just cornered a lion. The music was still blasting, the lights were still flashing. But in that small circle, everything had stopped. It was just the roar of the bully and the silence of the fighter. Keanu took a slow breath, his body shifting subtly. His feet planted firmly on the sticky floor. He was ready for whatever was coming next, even if the other guy had no idea what he was getting himself into. The illusion of the easy target was about to be shattered completely. The screaming from the aggressive man was getting louder and more ridiculous. He was standing right in front of Keanu, veins bulging in his neck, shouting insults that didn't even make much sense. He was calling Keanu names, accusing him of things he didn't do, and generally acting like a toddler who was denied a toy. The worst part was that the guy smelled strongly of cheap alcohol and sweat. It was a nasty smell that made the situation even more unpleasant. Keanu didn't shout back. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't call the guy names in return. Instead, he stood there with his posture relaxed but ready. He kept his hands visible, holding them up near his chest with his palms open. It is a universal sign for, "I am not a threat, but please stay back." He looked the angry man right in the eyes and spoke firmly but calmly. He said, "Hey, I don't want any trouble. It's crowded. Let's just relax." To anyone watching who knew how to fight, Keanu looked dangerous. He was grounded, his weight was perfectly distributed, and his eyes were focused and clear. But to the drunk amateur fighter, Keanu looked like a guy who was scared to fight. The bully completely misread the room. He saw Keanu's lack of aggression as weakness. He saw the polite words as an admission of guilt. In his twisted mind, he thought he had already won. The crowd had formed a tight circle around them now. The music was still blasting in the background, some heavy electronic track that made the floor vibrate, but nobody was dancing anymore. Everyone was facing the center. Phone cameras were held high, recording every second. It was a modern-day gladiator arena, but with smartphones instead of swords. You could hear people murmuring, "Oh my God, is he going to hit him? And who is that guy in the hat?" Nobody intervened because the angry man was so big and unpredictable that people were scared to get involved. The amateur fighter was feeding off the attention. He loved having eyes on him. He felt like the star of the show. He took a step closer, getting right up in Keanu's face, literally nose to nose. He was spitting as he yelled, saying things like, "You think you're tough? And I'll put you to sleep right now?" He was trying to get a reaction. He wanted Keanu to look scared. He wanted Keanu to beg him to stop. But Keanu just looked at him with a stone-cold face. Almost bored by the performance, Keanu tried one last time to make the guy see reason. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Just walk away, man. Go get a drink." It was a genuine attempt to save this guy from a massive mistake. It takes a lot of patience to stand there and take insults from a fool when you know you could knock him out in 1 second. That is the kind of patience Keanu has. He is a lover, not a fighter, unless he absolutely has to be, but the bully couldn't handle the rejection. He felt disrespected because Keanu wouldn't get angry. He felt like Keanu was looking down on him. He decided that words weren't enough anymore. He wanted to prove he was the alpha male. He wanted to hurt someone. Without any warning, the fighter shoved Keanu hard in the chest with both hands. It was a heavy push, meant to knock someone off balance and onto the floor. But Keanu didn't budge an inch. It was like pushing a brick wall. His feet were glued to the floor. When Keanu didn't fall, the fighter looked confused for a split second. He paused, blinking, surprised that this guy he thought was soft was so solid. That moment of confusion should have been the end of it. The fighter should have realized, hey, maybe I should stop now. But his ego was too big. He felt embarrassed that he pushed him and nothing happened. So he decided to escalate it. He wound up his right arm, cocking his fist back like he was preparing to throw a baseball. He was going to throw a punch right at Keanu's face. The tension in the air was electric. A few people in the crowd gasped. They knew what was coming. They were about to watch a celebrity get assaulted in a nightclub. The fighter had a mean grin on his face, thinking he was going to knock this guy out cold and look like a hero to his friends. He had no idea that he had just made the worst decision of his life. He was playing a game, but he didn't know the rules. Just as the fighter's fist started to fly forward, something changed in Keanu's demeanor. He didn't look like the polite guy from the bar anymore. His eyes narrowed. His hands moved from the passive stop position to a guard position. The years of training for movies like The Matrix and John Wick took over. When you practice a movement thousands of times, it becomes a reflex. You don't even have to think about it. Your body just knows what to do. The punch was slow and telegraphed like most drunk punches are. Keanu saw it coming a mile away. He didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. Instead of trying to block the punch with force, he simply moved. It was a movement so smooth and small that half the crowd probably missed it. He stepped slightly to the side, pivoting on his foot. The fighter's fist swung through the empty air where Keanu's head had been just a second before. The momentum of the missed punch made the fighter spin awkwardly. He lost his balance and stumbled forward, completely exposed. He was like a blind bull charging at a matador who had just stepped aside. The crowd held its breath. They had seen the calm, the shove, and the missed punch. They knew what was coming next. The tables had turned in the blink of an eye. The predator was about to become the prey, and he didn't even know it yet. The punch that the amateur fighter threw was supposed to be the end of the fight. In his head, he had already won. He imagined his fist connecting with Keanu's nose, the crowd cheering, and the other guy falling to the floor. But reality works very differently than imagination. Because Keanu had stepped aside so smoothly, the fighter's hand hit nothing but thick air. The momentum of his own swing spun him around like a top, making him dizzy and off balance. For a normal person, this is the moment where you step back and shake your hand, realizing you missed. But the fighter was too drunk and too angry to think clearly. He tried to stop his spin and lunge forward again, swinging wildly with his other hand. He was flailing like a fish out of water, leaving himself completely open. He had no defense, no guard up, and no control over his own body. He was just a big, heavy target. That was the exact moment Keanu Reeves decided the game was over. You could see it in his eyes. The polite, passive look was gone. It was replaced by a laser-sharp focus. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked like a professional who had seen enough nonsense. He didn't roar or scream like a monster in a movie. He was completely silent, which somehow made it much scarier. As the fighter stumbled forward with his wild second swing, Keanu moved inside his reach. It happened so fast that the people holding up their phones almost missed it. Keanu didn't try to punch the guy in the face. That's how street brawls work, not martial arts. Instead, he used the fighter's own weight against him. He sidestepped the swinging arm, grabbed the fighter by the shoulder and arm, and used a perfect judo trip. It wasn't a big, dramatic move like you see in the movies where people fly across the room. It was efficient and technical. Keanu swept his leg and used his grip to off-balance the big man. Gravity did the rest. The fighter, who was already stumbling, suddenly found his feet pulled out from under him. He dropped to the floor hard, landing with a loud thud that shook the drinks on the nearby tables. But Keanu wasn't done. Before the fighter could even try to get up or grab Keanu's leg, Keanu was already controlling him. He moved with the speed of a snake. He stepped around the fighter, grabbed his arm, and locked it behind his back in a way that looked incredibly painful. He pressed the fighter's face gently but firmly down toward the floor. The fighter was pinned. He was huge and muscular, but he couldn't move an inch. He was stuck in a checkmate position. The club went completely silent for a split second. The music seemed to fade into the background because the shock of what just happened was so loud. 10 seconds ago, this big guy was the bully, terrorizing people and acting tough. Now he was face down on the sticky club floor, completely helpless, held in place by a guy half his size who wasn't even breathing hard. The fighter tried to struggle. He tried to bench press his way up using his big arm muscles, but Keanu just adjusted his grip slightly. It was a subtle movement, but you could see the fighter's eyes go wide. He probably felt like his arm was about to snap. Keanu had leverage and technique on his side. It didn't matter how big the fighter was. He wasn't getting out of that hold until Keanu let him go. Then the murmuring started in the crowd. At first, it was just a few people whispering, "Whoa, did you see that?" But then the recognition hit. The lighting in the club changed, and as Keanu looked down at the man he was holding, the hat tipped back slightly. Someone near the front shouted, "Oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves." The whisper turned into a roar. "That's John Wick." Someone else screamed, "That's Neo." The realization spread through the room like electricity. People were holding their phones up, not just recording a random fight anymore, but realizing they were capturing a viral moment. They were watching a real-life action movie unfold right in front of them. The guy who had been quietly standing by the wall was actually one of the most famous action stars in the world, and he had just effortlessly taken down a bully for the fighter. This realization was even worse than the physical pain. He was lying on the floor, his face pressed against the dirty ground, and he started to hear the name Keanu being chanted. He froze. The color drained out of his face. He knew who Keanu Reeves was. Everyone knows who Keanu Reeves is. The horror of the situation washed over him. He hadn't just picked a fight with a random guy. He had tried to punch John Wick. He stopped struggling immediately. He went from a raging beast to a scared puppy in 2 seconds. He couldn't believe his bad luck. He was probably thinking, of all the people in New York City, why did I have to pick the one guy who knows how to actually fight? He felt stupid. He felt embarrassed. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the club laughing at him, not with him. Keanu looked down at him, not with anger or cruelty, but with a look that said, "Are you done now?" He didn't gloat. He didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't pose. He just held the guy there, waiting for him to calm down. It was the ultimate display of dominance. You don't need to yell when you can control a situation. Completely with just your hands and your calmness, the bouncers and security guards finally started to push their way through the crowd. They had seen the fight start, but were too far away to stop it initially. By the time they arrived, the work was already done. They saw the big guy on the floor and Keanu standing over him, calm as could be. The security guys looked at Keanu, then at the guy on the floor, and you could tell they were trying not to laugh. Even they were impressed. It was the takedown of the century. The fighter had learned a very expensive lesson that night. Never judge a book by its cover. And never, ever mess with the quiet guy in the leather jacket. As soon as the big guy on the floor stopped struggling, Keanu let go. He didn't hold him down a second longer than necessary. He simply released the grip on the fighter's arm and stepped back, putting a safe distance between them. It was a clean release. No extra shove, no kick while the guy was down. Keanu just stepped away and straightened his leather jacket, calmly dusting off the sleeve as if he had just brushed against some dirt on the street. The fighter scrambled to get up. He was clumsy and embarrassed, his face turning a deep shade of red. But when he finally stood up and saw who was standing in front of him, his jaw dropped open. He looked at Keanu with wide, terrified eyes. The murmurs from the crowd had finally registered in his drunk brain. Keanu Reeves. John Wick. Oh no, the realization hit him like a bucket of ice water. He had just tried to beat up one of the most famous action heroes on the planet. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He was shaking his head, muttering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," his voice trembling. The tough guy act had completely vanished. He looked small and weak now. Just then, a group of burly security guards finally pushed their way through the wall of people. They grabbed the fighter by the arms immediately. They were rough with him, ready to drag him out and probably throw him into the alley. They looked at Keanu to see if he wanted to press charges or if he wanted them to beat the guy up. Keanu shook his head. He walked over to the security guards and told them to take it easy. He actually spoke up for the guy who had just tried to punch him. He told them, "It's okay, he's just drunk. Just get him out of here safely." That is the kind of man Keanu is. Even after being disrespected and attacked, he didn't want to see the guy get hurt. He showed mercy when he didn't have to. The security guards seemed surprised, but listened. They tightened their grip on the fighter and began to march him toward the exit. The fighter didn't fight back. He kept looking back at Keanu with a look of total shame, knowing that he was the laughingstock of the entire club. As he disappeared through the doors, you could see the weight of his mistake crushing him once the troublemaker was gone. The tension in the room broke instantly. The music, which had seemed so quiet during the fight, came booming back in. The mood shifted from scary to electric. The crowd looked at Keanu, and suddenly everyone started cheering and clapping. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. People were shouting, "Keanu. Yeah, you're the man." And John Wick. The whole club was buzzing with energy. Keanu, however, looked a little uncomfortable. He isn't the type of person who loves being the center of attention. He gave a shy, small wave to the crowd, acknowledging their cheers but also signaling that he wanted the show to be over. He smiled that humble smile he is famous for, maybe blushing a little bit under the lights. He didn't raise his arms in victory. He didn't yell. He just stood there, looking like a guy who was glad the situation was over. Some people in the crowd tried to rush up to him, wanting to shake his hand or get a selfie. A few guys patted him on the back, saying things like, "Dude, that was awesome." Keanu was polite to everyone. He shook a few hands, said a quiet, "Thanks," but he kept moving. He wasn't there to sign autographs. He just wanted to finish his night. He slowly made his way back to the spot where he had been standing earlier. As if nothing had happened at all, he picked up his drink from the table where he had left it. The ice had melted a little, but it was still there. He took a sip and leaned back against the wall. The people around him gave him space now, but with a new kind of respect. They looked at him differently. Before, he was just a famous guy trying to relax. Now, he was a legend who had proven he could walk the walk. By the next morning, the story wasn't just contained to the walls of that club. The videos people had taken on their phones were all over the internet. Within hours, millions of people had watched the clip of the drunk guy swinging and missing, followed by Keanu effortlessly putting him on the floor. The comment sections were exploding. People loved it not because there was a fight, but because of who Keanu was. The headlines were wild. Keanu Reeves neutralizes bully in real life. Don't mess with John Wick and the most humble hero. The internet found the contrast between his movie characters, men who kill for revenge, and his real-life self, a man who uses violence only to protect himself and then forgives his attacker. Absolutely inspiring. It made people love him even more. For the amateur fighter. The next few days were probably very painful, not physically, but socially. He became a meme. He was the guy in the video who picked the wrong fight. He had to explain to his friends and family that he was the one who got dropped by a movie star in 3 seconds. It was a hard lesson, but hopefully he learned it. He learned that being big and loud doesn't make you tough, and that you should never judge a quiet man by his cover. Keanu, on the other hand, probably woke up, drank some coffee, and went about his day. He didn't do interviews about it. He didn't brag on social media. That is the mark of true confidence. You don't have to tell people you are strong. You just show it when you have to, and then you go back to living your life. The night ended quietly for him. He finished his drink, chatted with a few friends who were laughing about the craziness of it all, and eventually headed out into the cool New York air. He walked down the street, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the city like a shadow. The nightclub went back to normal, the music kept playing, and the people went home with a great story to tell. It was a night that proved reality can sometimes be just as dramatic as the movies, but thankfully with a much happier ending.